Live on tape, Work in Progress, a World at Work podcast about work, life, and everything in between. With award-winning radio host Tom Alexander and Workspan's Not Safe for Work columnist Charles Epstein. Here are your hosts, Tom and Charles.
Welcome to Work in Progress. My name is Tom Alexander, and of course, as always, I'm joined by my partner and good friend, Mr. Charles Epstein. Hey, Charles.
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day who was telling me about this his company's bring your dog to work policy. I know it's something of a trend. You're a dog guy. What do you think about this?
Well, I love dogs, but I'm not so sure if I'm totally jacked up to bring my dog. It depends, on what kind of dog. If you have a lap dog that just sit under your desk and sleep or something like that, no harm, no foul. But if you've got a real active dog and running around the workplace and, harassing other people while they're trying to, hit the water cooler, maybe not such a great idea.
Yeah, lap dog, or, a lap dog that looks like our vice president. Bada bing. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. I withdraw that immediately.
Okay. Well,
but it's out there. It's out there. I'm sorry. So I got to own it. Look, I understand if you're a dog owner, it's a great perk. You get to have your dog keep you company during work hours, and who knows? If you're a dog owner, great perk. You can cuddle with the dog when you're undergoing some work-related trauma. And, of course, it has the added benefit when you come home to a poop-free home. But, I know you're kind of on the fence, but I think it's a terrible idea.
Hey, terrible? All due respect. What kind of monster could possibly object to having your dog around to pet and play with? Again, with the caveat, as long as they don't go nuts.
Big caveat, yeah. I don't know, man. I hate to personalize this, but I'm gonna. Look, I'm just not a pet person. Definitely not a dog person. And I know people who are major dog people look at this as a major character flaw, like I'm taking a stand against babies or something. But I'm gonna have to make a confession. Growing up, I was actually terrified of dogs and never quite lost that fear.
Oh, all right. Yeah. I can listen. I've had some encounters with large dogs in my lifetime, particularly as a kid, that had me a little bit on edge as well. So I hear that. I definitely got you there. But the cute little dog, the little, either toy breed or medium-sized breed, that's just very, playful. I really like that.
It's a very nice side of you, Tom. I'm glad you're able to expose that to our audience.
Yeah.
That's quite delightful. I have to admit it. That probably even goes deeper than that, and I'm sure I shouldn't say. I know it'll upset some people, but I have to say it, man. I've often wondered how otherwise civilized people could let them in the house. They're stamping around the yard or the street, rolling around, and God knows what. And you welcome onto the couch or, God forbid, onto your bed. And, you live with them as though they're an equal member of the family. I don't get it.
All right. Equal. Okay. Maybe our dog Ginger didn't do the taxes, and she was
No.
But it's not like she has a vote where we're going to dinner or our next family vacation. There is a line, I guess.
All right. Good to hear that the Alexanders set limits, at least there. So, I was once at a party and an otherwise intelligent or an intelligent-seeming woman was speaking rapturously about her dog and the unqualified love it gave her. So, I asked her, have you ever looked into its eyes? Really looked. There's nothing there. What you think of as love is merely a transaction, and that's the whole nature of the attachment. She and her new boyfriend, they weren't happy.
Yeah.
At least with me.
There's a procedure they're doing in Europe right now, which I think can get you to like dogs. You should maybe look into that. I think that's, I think you need to work on this, buddy.
All right. The Ludovico technique version 2. I'm down with the program. Where does this end? Hamsters, rabbits, snakes? I don't know. I don't think so, man. I don't think so. Some years ago, my daughter had a hamster. It might have been all of 4 months, 6 months. I don't know, but those were a long 4 or 6 months, particularly when this thing was always getting loose in 3, 4 days. I never knew, it would all of a sudden surface in my sock drawer or something. I really didn't like living with that.
Can't have that.
No.
As for cats, well, I'm allergic to cats, so that's one thing. So that's out from me. But yeah, I'm with you I hear you on the reptile thing. Living in South Florida, we've basically displaced the native population of things that go bump in the night. A casual stroll around the neighborhood could really turn into a very creepy nature show.
Suppose nature gave a war and everybody came. The snakes, the birds, the lizards and frogs. And suppose that the polluters, the species on Earth called man, were the enemy in that war. And then suppose that the human race lost.
Yes, let's not go in for a closer look.
Yeah, I guess, look, here's where I'm sort of sympathetic to your anti-dog position. From a liability standpoint, if a pet bites an employee, that could be a problem. If you're a business owner, yeah, I assume you can be covered under the general liability policy, but that might not be enough. Look, the victim should decide to sue the dog owner, which wouldn't be great.
Thanks for that, because it's 1 point in my favor. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, look, still, I'm strongly for I'm pro bringing your dog to work. Again,
pro pooch to work.
Yeah. Though if you own a pit bull named Killer that has a history of getting ornery and making people die for cover, yeah, maybe you need to keep Killer at home. I'm
very happy to see that you're drawing these lines.
I'm glad you shared your fears.
Yes.
I feel that we're making progress.
Good.
Next week's session, I'm going to be out of town, so there'll be another therapist in.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you, because we know that's one of the side benefits of doing this.
Yeah.
We get our mind straight too.
Right, absolutely. All right, we have some great guests today. We have a first repeat guest today. It's Dan Cafaro. He's the editor-in-chief of Workspan. We also have who we've dubbed the hardest working broadcaster the players trust most. It's the Miami Heat's Jason Jackson, and he'll be joining us and talking about culture of the NBA and the Heat in particular. That's all coming up right here on Work in Progress. Back in a moment.
Calling all sales compensation pros. Come for the networking, stay for the innovative ideas, news, commentary, and debate. If sales compensation planning and design are part of your job, you won't want to miss Spotlight on Sales Compensation, August 10th through the 21st in Chicago. This niche conference dives into nuances and complexities of sales comp strategy, a driving force of bottom-line success. Hear from pros at Marriott, Avis, Ernst & Young, Siemens, Dell, Cisco, and many others. Pay gaps, AI, incentives, channel selling, compensation risk indicators, mending relationships between sales, HR, and finance. It's all covered at Spotlight on Sales Comp, August 10th through the 21st in Chicago. Go to worldatwork.org/events to register.
Workspan's editor-in-chief, Dan Cafaro, a champion of the pod from day one, who appropriately is our first repeat guest, joins us right now from beautiful and hot Arizona. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Tom. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and you can say hello to my colleague, my esteemed colleague, Mr. Charles Epstein.
Charles, how are you?
Dan, I'm doing well. I just want to let you know that this esteemed colleague business is fairly new. I should mention, or I probably shouldn't mention, but I'm mentioning it, so it's out of the bag. I kind of twisted Tom's arm several podcasts ago to say that. So thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate that.
Oh no, you're absolutely welcome.
I've worked hard. I've worked hard to get there. The only way is down from here.
Yeah.
But thank you, regardless.
It's like attaining a belt in the martial arts. You know, he's now up to like the I don't know, the brown belt, the green belt. All right, the green one. Okay.
I just thought maybe the introduction of old crony wore out its welcome. I don't know.
Yeah. Yes, we retired that long ago. But this is we're recording this on the 19th of July in the midst of a nationwide heat wave. You're in Phoenix. We're in South Florida, which is a kind of a good thing because usually we have to deal with this heavy, intense heat all on our lonesome. So it's good to spread the pain around a little bit. Anyway, Dan, I know you got some really interesting articles coming up. We'd like to sort of discuss those. Maybe you can give us a little bit of a sneak preview. Looking at your table of contents, some really, really interesting stories here. Reskilling, obsolete jobs drive need for continuous learning. What's that about?
Well, reskilling, I mean, clearly for us, not just the profession that we're in, but in general, when you look at the workforce, and there's so many aspects to whether it be the aging demographic or just the simple fact that a lot of the administrative roles are changing, they're becoming automated. So it's preparing the workforce for today and tomorrow and 2020 and beyond. And so we keep coming at it from different angles. We've had different stories that touch on reskilling. What I like that Tricia Howard did with this piece is it really drills down and is showing, not only how technology forces employers to adapt, but, what are employees doing to adapt, and are they adapting well? And the answer is sure, some are, but a lot aren't. So what do we do to help in the continuous learning mindset, where you need to be approaching your job just not in the old format of point A to point B every day. This is what I do. You have to be ready to just hit the ground running and possibly not just be in like a rigorous training program, but be in a impromptu training session. It's like you think that you're working in software today that you might say, oh, I've been on this platform for a couple of years and it works just fine, but tomorrow you may have to completely transform the way you're thinking and adapt. Just adaptable.
Yeah, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I know in September you're going to be covering EAP, but it seems to me that because everybody's going to be sort of on this perpetual training footing, and you're always trying to get out ahead of the so-called evolution of technology. As technology pushes people out of jobs, you're looking for the next job. I think that's going to create a great degree of instability and anxiety. And I hope it's not the case, but I think the reality is that will be the case.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I think one of the things we all have to overcome is the fear, right? Fear of the unknown, and I think we've talked about AI in the past. But I've been also doing a lot of research with virtual reality and augmented reality and all of these terms, AR, VR, are kind of nebulous in the sense that we're not necessarily thinking about them in how they would impact us. We think of them as like gaming systems and people who aren't in our space. but it's coming to our space. It's coming to all of our spaces, no matter where you work, no matter which industry, no matter really which level of job you're in, whether it's the C-suite or you're a line worker or manager. So I think it's fascinating to me to see how it's being applied. When we think of virtual reality, we may think of manufacturing jobs, we may think of assembly lines, and how that's going to help people develop their skills. But it's helping HR itself from a hiring standpoint. It's helping companies create cultures that are more diverse and robust, and creating these hypothetical situations that, to me, really speak to what society is screaming for at this point in time.
Yeah, it is interesting. By the way, I'd recommend to anybody interested in this topic more broadly, Martin Ford's Rise of the Robots. He wrote that a couple of years ago. And one of the interesting, actually terrifying takeaways from that book is, people automatically think AI is going to supplant people on the assembly line or jobs that are just based on a lot of routine tasks. But it's really getting very sophisticated, and it's starting to threaten and encroach on some white-collar jobs. You have technology that can write pretty good AP-style news stories. It can do paralegal work. It could scan X-rays. So even radiologists are going to be threatened. It really is, and it's going to happen pretty fast. People are going to have to be reskilling and reskilling again and reskilling yet again.
That's right. Learning, unlearning, relearning. When you mentioned, having robots or bots or AI or algorithms and all of the things that would go into, say, writing a draft of a story, we receive pitches every day, and honestly, there have been a couple recently that I looked at twice and said, okay, where's this coming from? This may not be a person.
Really?
Once I do, honestly, I mean, I do think that there are now, some, and I guess, you could call them phishing scams, but I think there are also maybe experiments, to see what we can do with, let's just say you're a software company, and maybe there's experiments happening now where they're just shooting off cover letters to publishers. I know that sounds really paranoid, or just off the chain, but I think it may be happening already.
Yeah, I think it started with those Nigerian scam letters.
For sure. For sure.
Hey, Dan, interesting articles coming down the line here, and I'm kind of fascinated by the idea of, I guess, what you would call the ancient art, right, of corporate storytelling. Tell us a little bit about that. That sort of it's an ancient art, the history of it.
Yeah, this story, also in the August issue, written by Jim Fickus, who's the editor of World at Work Journal and just a terrific contributing writer to Workspan. So storytelling, right, in the workplace, it almost seems like it would be trite, or it's not something that necessarily fits with our perspective when it comes to how we get jobs done and how we manage projects. It would be like poetry in the workplace, right? Where does that fit? And and the truth is, storytelling is obviously really helpful, when it comes to any form of communications, delivering a narrative. And people are more inclined to learn if you create the story itself, and then fill in around the story with what you need to done. So I think what Jim did, which I really appreciate having reporters. I mean, Jim has a background at the Arizona Republic, sort of the mentality of a news reporter who is going to go to a class, talk with people who are taking classes on storytelling and how it can help them in the workplace. And that's what he did. In Phoenix, they have a center which is the training is all about helping people with words, because a lot of people who are, whether they're project managers or just team leads, communication to them may not be as simple as, sitting there and trying to, let's say explain, I'm the team lead in HR, and I need to explain the benefits program to, the accounting department. And so now I have to sit down with them and talk about it. It would really help the communication if you thought of it, in the terms of how a writer would approach any kind of plot, and have a protagonist, and people relate to that. I think it's human nature.
Another article I saw, Brett Christie contributed financial playbook. It's how financial wellness has extended from the field to the office. Tell us a little bit about that. That's interesting.
It is. I mean, financial wellness, right? We could all use more of it in our lives.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said with the debt that many employees are entering the workforce with, whether it be student loan debt or just poorly mismanaged credit card debt. The point is, why are employers responsible for the financial wellness of their employees? Well, they're not responsible for it, but they're certainly going to help them remove the distraction and remove when an employee is not thinking about his job, is not passionate and obsessed about doing his job the best he can do it. The employer suffers. So what can the employer do when somebody's struggling with their financial well-being? And in this case, what Brett did, and it's funny, Brett's a former sports writer, which is my background as well, which may be the reason I hired him, because I thought, well, it worked for me, maybe it'll work for Brett in this space. But honestly, he's a great communicator, and he's somebody who comes at it from a different perspective when it comes to a story angle. And so in this case, he told me about this football player. He's escaping my mind, but essentially, there are a lot of obvious star football players who their careers are short, right? And most of them, I mean, on average, they're out of the NFL in 3 to 5 years, so they make tons of money, but they're typically not going to be the most responsible with their money. And Brett, talked about that and saying, can this apply to the workplace? And in general, it certainly does, because, what you're talking about is, in this case, an owner of a team, and, the franchise helping this player, removing all the obstacles, all the, things that would worry somebody off the field, and help prepare them and get them in a comfortable position once their playing career is done. Well, it's the same for employees, So again, the analogy, when you think of, nobody has much sympathy for football players making tens of millions of dollars and then, just making poor decisions on how to spend it. But the reality is, it's really more about them understanding, wise investment decisions, and really just having someone talk to them about discipline. And I think, discipline is something, and they made a game out of it with the football players too. So when you bring the gaming element into it, I think it really it's satisfied, both them learning how to, save money, and so somebody like Gronkowski from the Patriots, all he ever spent, according to what I've read, is were endorsement deals. That was what he would spend, on basically day-to-day living expenses. But his salary was completely dedicated to savings, so he didn't touch his salary. Now, of course, we don't all have that advantage, but you could say, well, 10%, whatever might be a way for you to, have a built-in savings program for your employee.
Well, Dan, we really appreciate the time today. Sure. It's always fun to talk to you. And Dan Cafaro is Workspan's editor-in-chief. as we said earlier, our first repeat guest, Dan. Our first repeat guest. It's great to no better choice than
Yes.
Dan Cafaro to
And
join us as our first repeat guest.
And I just want to say that you're about 15 appearances away from being our version of Alec Baldwin. Just want to let you know that.
Thanks, guys. Thanks. I won't be coming in with any HR horror stories. That's Stephanie's beat, but I will do what I can.
Sounds good. We'll be back right after these words.
This is Work in Progress.
Calling all sales compensation pros. Come for the networking, stay for the innovative ideas, news, commentary, and debate. If sales compensation planning and design are part of your job, you won't want to miss Spotlight on Sales Compensation, August 10th through the 21st in Chicago. This niche conference dives into nuances and complexities of sales comp strategy, a driving force of bottom-line success. Hear from pros at Marriott, Avis, Ernst & Young, Siemens, Dell, Cisco, and many others. Pay gaps, AI, incentives, channel selling, compensation risk indicators, mending relationships between sales, HR, and finance. It's all covered at Spotlight on Sales Comp, August 10th through the 21st in Chicago. Go to worldatwork.org/events to register.
Watch me! Watch me! I got it! Watch me! I got it! Hey! I got something that makes me want to shout.
Jason Jackson is the longtime broadcaster, courtside reporter, and host with the Miami Heat. And over the years, he's earned the title of perhaps the hardest working reporter the players trust most. The likes of none other than Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, LeBron James have shared thoughts that go well beyond the cliched responses network and other market broadcasters get. It's great to have him join us right now. Hey, Jason, welcome.
Hey, it's great to be back. It's a very kind introduction. It's just what happens when you're around all the time. Comfort. That's it.
That's right. Showing up is half the battle, right?
Come on, man. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, say hello to my podcast partner, Charles Epstein.
Hey,
Charles,
Jason.
greetings, sir.
Yes, same. The hardest working reporter the players trust most. Usually we have a whole process. We play each guest on with an appropriate tune, and I think this is going to be a pretty easy decision. I think it's going to have to be Jay Brown, little James Brown. That's an easy call. And anytime I can go with James Brown, I'm going with James Brown. Anyway, Jason, again, thanks for spending some time with us today from balmy South Florida. I just want to let you know that we keep this podcast at a steady and refreshing 75 degrees. So you shouldn't have any hydration or cramping issues as we do this, because it is
The
tough.
makeup will not melt today. That's nice.
Okay, great. Same. As I believe we conveyed to you, this is not a sports podcast. We typically talk with people from all walks of life about their work and how they balance it with their everyday life. So my first question, how are the Heat looking this year?
Oh, man. It's such an interesting cycle that teams tend to go through. Obviously, when I showed up back in 2004, the team was transitioning with this young star and traded in one of the most dominant players of the game, talking about Dwayne Wade and Shaquille O'Neal, respectively. And right into championship contention, we went, falling in the conference finals to Detroit, and then overcoming them the next year, winning the title. And then there was a little gap of time before the dynamic summer of 2010 when the gentlemen that Tom rolled out all came together and put together a 4-year run that led to 2 titles. And now, we're kind of on the backside of that. And now with Dwayne retired, we turn to another great player from Marquette and Jimmy Butler, and with a core of young players to see exactly where this particular conglomeration of players will turn us next. The one thing I know about teams that try to make the move to the top of the mountain is that you have to sacrifice. And it's the easiest thing to say in this business and the hardest thing to do, because you're talking about marquee, you're talking about money, you're talking about minutes. And particularly if you were the guys elsewhere and you move into this space and this dynamic calls for you to step back or maybe even step up. It's just a change in a very habit-formed atmosphere. Professional athletes, more than any other occupation, are creatures of habit. And sometimes you have to get out of your box and be more. Or the more is doing something different. It may be something totally subjective to maybe what you've done in the past, in the sense of, are you the forefront or are you a complementary player? But everybody has to connect with their role, and they have to be connected in unison. What Toronto just did is the greatest example of that, of a new piece, a new coach, a new philosophy all coming in together for a championship. We haven't seen anything like that since 2008 with the Celtics. So it takes time, number one, and then number two, it takes talent. And so I know the Miami Heat are hopeful that that young group, and it's tough to see Josh Richardson go, but you still have Bam Adebayo and Justice Winslow and Derek Jones Jr. along with Deion Waiters and so many other veterans that are still here that have that hunger and ability to not just get into the postseason, but to make a push and have an opportunity to play for it all. And everybody thinks they can win it now with the injuries that Golden State has suffered. So it's going to be a hell of a season for everybody.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Just as a quick aside, I have a question that goes to some of the stuff you're saying, talking about Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade and the Marquette connection. One of my favorite players growing up, I was a big Knicks fan in the 70s and so forth, was the late Dean Meminger. Unfortunately, he had a not great end. So I guess I have a little bit of a Marquette connection myself. Anyway, one of the things we talk about in this podcast is culture, what goes into making a solid, positive work culture, and how hard it is to cultivate and how fragile it can be. The Heat organization, or Heat Nation, is known for its culture, which I have to believe is largely a reflection of Pat Riley's values. I'd like to get your sense of that. But, you see it in how the team prepares and competes, and you see it in how the organization keeps former players in the fold, which promotes a sense of cohesion and sustainability. Some organizations, I think, confuse tradition with culture. For instance, the Lakers have a tradition, but I don't know presently that they have a cohesive or dominant culture. Maybe I'm wrong. That's my observation. As you're closer to this than most, how would you define the culture that the Heat have created, and how have they managed to instill and sustain it?
I think top of the list is the expectation to compete for championships. Like, that remains, as you noted, our President Pat Riley sets the tone with messaging that is the main thing. Like, you have to remember, the main thing is the main thing. We can have all of the adornments of game entertainment and concessions and the best concourse and the greatest uniforms and this beautiful floor and easy parking and this building that sits on the western shore of Biscayne Bay, but none of that matters if you're not focused on the main thing, which is championship organization with those aspirations. So that's maintaining those types of players, that type of conditioning, that type of coaching. And so it all kind of becomes this kind of cyclical focus on excellence, to the type of people that you hire, to the type of people that you keep. And let me focus on the idea of the type of people you keep. You look around our organization and you see a lot of people that have been around for 10, 15, 20, 25 years. We still have 8 people in the organization that are original employees from 1988 that have been around for 32 seasons.
Wow.
You look around the NBA and try to find that. Good luck, because you're going to take some time out your life doing it. It's pretty astonishing that here I am entering my 16th season, and I'm still one of the junior members of the broadcast organization. It's amazing, that part of it. Coach Bolstra is in his 25th season with the team. His 12th as head coach. there's only Popovich that's been there longer, and he just edges out Carlisle in Dallas. And so, while most organizations are always looking to make a change to make their advance, I think the organization looks at what is the main component for real change, which is your personnel. You got to believe in a philosophy. You got to believe in a way, and that way, by the way, can't become stagnant. It must change with the ebbs and flows of the trends of the league. But that's just making sure that you have coaches that are flexible, and obviously Coach Spoelstra, still being a pretty young coach, does a really good job kind of focusing in on making sure that the team is using whatever rules or trends in style of play to the advantage of the personnel that he has. And so, with a very long answer to simply say that you have to remain the best to actually be the best.
It's interesting. You mentioned Popovich, and I think the Spurs organization has been successful in sort of seeding the NBA with people from their organization, some of his coaches and so forth. I don't know that the Heat have done that. I don't know that people who worked with under Spoelstra or Riley, apart from obviously the recent hiring by Michigan of Juwan Howard, which is that's going to be an amazing developing story. I'm looking forward to following that because there's obviously so much drama. But is that a fair observation that compared to Popovich, the Heat really have not seeded the NBA with coaching talent and other types of talent in the front office?
Yeah, because no one leaves. that's the issue. For the most part, you take a look at it over the last 15 years, and you have Coach Fizdale. Well, let's start with Coach Van Gundy, obviously, in Orlando, and then Detroit, who's now calling games for ESPN, and then Coach Fizdale, and then, as you just noted, Coach Howard. Everybody else still works for the organization. It's unique in that way, because you literally look at folks who, like Bob McAdoo, who retired from coaching, but is a part of the scouting effort. To who else is in that mix? Same with Ron Rothstein, who's now on television with me after retiring from coaching. Keith Askins, who was a longtime player and assistant coach, moved up into the front office. Players like Glenn Rice and Alonzo Mourning and Shane Battier all work in the organization. So I think the organization tries to take those resources onto itself and cultivate and rise those folks within the organization. I don't know if there's one way that's better or the other, but one thing you do know when you have those folks come back, there's that institutional knowledge, there's that culture-carrying element that stays right among your ranks.
By the way, I'm still surprised that Shane Battier hasn't announced a run for office. I always thought he'd make a terrific politician, and I'm sure I'm not the first person who's noted that.
Life is far easier as vice president of analytics and basketball development, I believe. So with a young family and a fantastic philanthropic organization, the Take Charge Foundation, the Battier. Who needs the headache, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which is unfortunate because we do want the best and brightest to serve, but it's just it's not as appealing as maybe it once was.
Yeah, he's just an impressive guy.
It's funny we talk about there's no place like home, which is sort of what you're saying, Jason, about the Heat. Yet Jerry Seinfeld once famously said that being a sports fan is basically being loyal to laundry, as players are always changing teams. With all the free agent signings and teams in complete flux this season more than any, and with the new trend where superstars dictate where they want to play, essentially play general manager in selecting their teams, I wonder that if over time an impact on the fans' support of their team has changed. Sports fans have been rooting for their team since childhood, so it's kind of hard to imagine these trends would erode their loyalty, but it has to have some kind of impact, right?
It does. I still think it's about if you're winning or not, right? The South Florida sports fan gets a tough rap about their attention and what they're going to turn to. Is it going to be the arts? Is it going to be the newest club? Is it going to be the beach? Is it going to be the 3 Division I institutions in South Florida, the 4 professional sports organizations. There's just a lot available, and you do have to compete for their attention, and you have to compete for their dollar. And sometimes it's the same dollar. It's not the biggest city in the United States either. So it's a challenge, and we fully step to it into noting the things that I extended to you before. We have a little bit of a showcase that we can provide by extending our product via telecast, obviously. So we get you, a little titillated by, hey, look how awesome this environment is when this building is rocking and rolling. Then we hopefully grab you when you come in, and have your experience. But nothing is more drawing, nothing's more compelling than a deep run into the postseason. And I think you have to embrace that. I don't think it's something to fight and, try to, label fans as bandwagon or what have you. I mean, everybody loves winning. And when there is a lot going on, people will turn their attention to something else that's more entertaining. In the end, we have to remember this is the entertainment business. There's some towns that we travel to around the country, and hell or high water, win or loss, folks are going to be in the building. But you examine the landscape and say, well, what the hell else would you be doing if not, enjoying the wonderful entertainment of NBA evening on a cold winter's night indoors among some of the greatest athletes in the world. So I say all that to say that there is always going to be an ebb and flow. You want to create a loyalty and a consistency and an enjoyment through the things that you experience when you're watching and going to a game, and that you got to be dedicated to that regardless if you're going to the postseason or not. But as the father of young athletes and sports fans who maybe don't hold on to franchises as much as they hold on to star players, that is going to be a part of the experience, and that's why you always want to make sure that you have great players on your team.
So I guess battered fan syndrome is not a thing.
It's amazing. I thought you would see it in the Garden eventually. Charles Oakley experienced it.
Although he's battered, I guess
in
that case,
level.
battered former Knicks.
That's
syndrome.
assault and battery, exactly. But it astonishes me. I talk about it all the time. You walk in the Garden, and they haven't had a real contender since the middle 90s. It's been over a decade since they've had a playoff team, and that building is packed every single night. Knicks fans, in the end, are basketball fans and love to see the best players in the world play. That is the only way I can explain it.
Watching you as a sideline reporter doing the Heat post-game show, you have to strike a balance, I'm assuming. You obviously have a rapport with the guys, the Heat staff, yet you need to maintain some objectivity. Have there been occasions over the years where your objectivity ruffled feathers with a player or coach who weren't expecting it? Any time where Chris Bosh doing his typical photobomb routine got a little physical?
No, it's been.
You never had a call. Never had a call post-game flagrant on Bosh.
No, not at all. And it's just. I think the one thing that you guys are experiencing, and it's the one thing that I hope that I'm always radiating, is that I love what I'm doing. It's absolutely the best job I've ever had, and it's a couple jobs, all in one. I'm hosting pregame, halftime, and postgame while reporting in-game. And oftentimes, the majority of my colleagues, those jobs are split up among 2 different people. I love that I have those dual responsibilities because sometimes in-game that work doesn't present itself. We've prepared as best we possibly can, but the storylines move in a different direction or the game takes on its own life, and you have to accept that as a courtside reporter and just, run with how the broadcast is going, fitting in where you can get in. Whereas with pre-half and post, I'm obviously the main and lead host, and so there's a lot more to chew on. But balance of those two and having those 2 things each night provide for such a fantastic experience. And the neat thing about the job is even, you're getting into covering 1,000 games, over these 15, 16 years, and each one has its own thing. Like, you still have to throw the ball in the air, and you got to defend, and you got to put the ball in the basket. But each of those stories have a unique flavor. Even if the leading scorer is the same, or the assist person is the same, or the top rebounder block, there's always something nuanced to an NBA game that allows for a different vibe and feel and story to be told each night. So that's where the energy comes from each time.
We're speaking with Jason Jackson, of course, the reporter, host, broadcaster with the Miami Heat, long time with the Miami Heat, 16 years. And Jason, to Charles's question, you've clearly established a trust factor that gets players to open up. Tell us a little bit about the preparation that goes into earning those candid answers.
I think first it's about making sure that when there isn't a microphone, that there's a rapport, that there's not always just a need to have a conversation when I'm compiling information for the telecast. So the player's first press conference or one-on-one during training camp, or if it's a mid-season trade, taking some time to step aside, say who I am, show what I do, and then make sure that you're present, and then they see how you form and connect with the other players as well, so that consistency, that reputation is in the building. And then you have to differentiate. I am not there to dive inside their personal lives. I'm not there to talk about anything other than their basketball or their philanthropic work or whatever upliftment they're in, and that makes my job a lot easier. I once was on the prying side of the broadcast / media pool, but that's no longer my gig. And so with that freedom comes much more comfort, in that when you see me coming, I'm always here to talk about, the one thing. And then also when the interviews are done, like just being human and trying not, I can find myself at times, just trying to do the job, and it's moving on and moving on and moving on. But I do thank people for their time, and I do appreciate what guys are going through beyond the basketball floor, and try to make sure that they're aware of my compassion in those places.
I just want to ask you, we actually asked, I think it was Tony Fiorentino, right, Tom? We spoke with him some time ago in some other context. And I asked him, tell us the one thing that nobody knows about a Heat player that would startle us or interest us. And he mentioned that LeBron James is a natural lefty. He does everything lefty, but he plays basketball righty. So I'm going to ask you that question. You can't give us the LeBron answer.
Gotcha. Did you know that Chris Bosh was a guitar player?
I think I did know that. I know he's also a computer guy.
I did not know that.
Oh, big coding. Well, I think the part about the guitar playing that's interesting is he started off trying to learn it by himself. Now, he was smart enough at a certain point to go, there's only so far I'm going to go. I'm going to need some lessons in theory and how composition works, but hired some guys. But learned how to play the guitar, and then extended himself as a student of the guitar, just out of interest. This is a guy who would sit and, read novels before games, and then that's how he kind of centered himself. And so his connection to music is interesting. But you also know that he's a big coding guy.
Any music genre or any guitars that he likes or patterns his playing after?
Not that I'm aware of. He's an eclectic dude, so I'm imagining, he's playing a little bit of everything. Probably some old school R&B, maybe even some riffs on some current hip hop, maybe even going to some country tunes. He's from Texas, so he's probably got some blues or some country and western in there. So
you can get together with Jimmy Butler, because Jimmy Butler's a big country music fan.
Okay, that situation though.
Yeah, that is true, and I'll tell you, it always would. Tom McGinnis, who's the I'm sure the radio play-by-play man with the Sixers, that was always a head scratcher for him. But he would often bring that up, that Jimmy Butler enjoys country western. So there you go.
Yeah, their love of music has to also present itself in the form of vinyl. If you don't have it on vinyl, I don't think you love it.
Right. By the way, I'd be Jason, I'd be remiss. I have to mention this. My mom is 89, and I have to believe she's the Heat's fiercest, most loyal octogenarian fan in all of South Florida. Her faves, not surprisingly, are D. Wade and Chris Bosh. And I think she'd probably pass out if D. Wade showed up for an early bird special at her favorite diner in Tamarack.
Well, they have one thing in common now. They're both retired. So it could happen.
Could happen. I'll let my mom know that. She'll be thrilled.
Yeah.
Jason, we really very much appreciate your time today. It's been a lot of fun, pretty illuminating as well. Some really interesting stuff there. Thanks so much.
Absolute pleasure. Please have me back sometime.
Oh, we absolutely will. It was a lot of fun. Jason Jackson, the longtime broadcaster, courtside reporter, host with the Miami Heat. If you're out of the area and you're listening, get the NBA package and you'll see them. It's well worth it. We'll be back right after these words.
Damn! Good Lord! Super bad! What's that? Let me hear you.
What to do when you need external HR expertise? Head on over to World at Work's vendor directory, kind of like the Yelp of HR, but without the biases. It's where to turn when you're looking for resources and providers in the world of HR, from legal services to compensation management to loyalty programs to exec comp to relocation services and so much more. You'll find pros in the vendor directory, a seemingly endless reserve of vetted, trusted HR providers. Visit worldatwork.org and take a look.
Wrapping things up now on Work in Progress along with Charles Epstein. I'm Tom Alexander. Two great guests today, of course, Dan Cafaro from Workspan and the Miami Heat's Jason Jackson.
Yeah. Dan is the first guy, the first guest who's come back for a repeat appearance, second lap around the track, and shared with us some preview of some of the stories they're running, some really good thing. I'm looking forward to that one on storytelling. I know that resonated with you.
Yeah, it did. And I just find the whole culture of business, how it's just evolved so much really across the board in all kinds of businesses, small businesses, mom and pop businesses, and of course the major corporations. And I just find that there's just a lot to be gained from listening to, the whole idea of culture in a business and how it is a thing. Culture is a thing.
It's interesting when you talk about storytelling, particularly from a standpoint of a particular company and their narrative, which is, I guess, what the article was largely about. You talk about culture, you are trying to capture that and figure out a way of, sustaining it, but within the framework of a narrative. Because again, what I'm assuming some of the elements of the story is going to be addressing is why storytelling, it's an ancient thing. It always resonated. It was always very effective at transmitting information and getting people to understand it at a deeper level. Certainly from an engagement standpoint, it's effective. And actually talking about culture, talking with Jason about the Heat culture, how that's created and maintained all these years, and the continuity with Pat Riley and all the people he's retained who were once players. They're in the organization, and even within the organization, they have opportunities to do a variety of things. Bob McAdoo for years was on the bench, and now he's assumed, I don't know if it's a scouting role, but some other role, and they're just very, very good at creating, well, he talks about it as a sort of a championship culture. We expect to always be competing, and even when they're not realistically contenders, there's that mentality and that level of detail. We know, for instance, Pat Riley, back from his Laker days, was always about these insane practices and attention to detail. And you have to assume his coach, who's been with him now, I think this, as he said, the second most tenured coach, second only to Popovich over at San Antonio. Clearly, he is a proponent and an extension of the Pat Riley approach, and that's what they've created. And it's a pretty fascinating thing. It was a great conversation.
It was, and one of the takeaways for me was how he said, no one leaves. It's one big happy family over there, and that's interesting, particularly in today's sports, where you're, jumping from team to team, and not just the players, but executives and administration and stuff like that, tend to move around a lot too, but not with the Heat. They just kind of stay on. So they're doing something right. That's for sure.
Yeah. Great template. And last thing, great to have an opportunity to give a shout out to my mom, South Florida's most fervent and devoted octogenarian Heat fan. Also, I'm glad we're able to bring Jason on with the Godfather of the Soul. I thought that was most appropriate, and I hope he deeply appreciates the reference.
Who they used to call the hardest working man in show business, in James Brown. Jason Jackson, the hardest working man in sideline reporting and hosting and you name it. He is basketball's Mr. Go-To, that's for sure. It's really, really something. Anyway, got to wrap things up here, and we will see you again next time on Work in Progress. For Charles Epstein, I'm Tom Alexander. Take care, everybody. See you soon.
This has been Work in Progress, a World at Work podcast about work, life, and everything in between, with award-winning radio host Tom Alexander and Workspan's Not Safe for Work columnist Charles Epstein. For more, visit worldatwork.org/work-in-progress. That's worldatwork.org/work-in-progress. Join us next week for another edition of Work in Progress.
Workspan and the Miami Heat's Jason Jackson.
Yeah. Dan is the first guy, the first guest who's come back for a repeat appearance, second lap around the track, and shared with us some preview of some of the stories they're running, some really good thing. I'm looking forward to that one on storytelling. I know that resonated with you.
Yeah, it did. And I just find the whole culture of business, how it's just evolved so much really across the board in all kinds of businesses, small businesses, mom and pop businesses, and of course the major corporations. And I just find that there's just a lot to be gained from listening to, the whole idea of culture in a business and how it is a thing. Culture is a thing.
It's interesting when you talk about storytelling, particularly from a standpoint of a particular company and their narrative, which is, I guess, what the article was largely about. You talk about culture, you are trying to capture that and figure out a way of, sustaining it, but within the framework of a narrative. Because again, what I'm assuming some of the elements of the story is going to be addressing is why storytelling, it's an ancient thing. It always resonated. It was always very effective at transmitting information and getting people to understand it at a deeper level. Certainly from an engagement standpoint, it's effective. And actually talking about culture, talking with Jason about the Heat culture, how that's created and maintained all these years, and the continuity with Pat Riley and all the people he's retained who were once players. They're in the organization. And even within the organization, they have opportunities to do a variety of things. Bob McAdoo for years was on the bench, and now he's assumed, I don't know if it's a scouting role, but some other role. And they're just very, very good at creating, well, he talks about it as a sort of a championship culture. We expect to always be competing. And even when they're not realistically contenders, there's that mentality and that level of detail. We know, for instance, Pat Riley, back from his Laker days, was always about these insane practices and attention to detail. And you have to assume his coach, who's been with him now, I think this, as he said, the second most tenured coach, second only to Popovich over at San Antonio. Clearly, he is a proponent and an extension of the Pat Riley approach, and that's what they've created. And it's a pretty fascinating thing. It was a great conversation.
It was, and one of the takeaways for me was how he said, no one leaves. It's one
Right.
big happy family over there, and that's interesting, particularly in today's sports. Where you're, jumping from team to team, and not, not just the players, but executives and administration and stuff like that, tend to move around a lot too, but not with the Heat. They just kind of stay on. So they're doing something right. That's for sure.
Yeah, great template. And last thing, great to have an opportunity to give a shout out to my mom, South Florida's most fervent and devoted octogenarian Heat fan. Also, I'm glad we're able to bring Jason on with the Godfather of the Soul. I thought that was most appropriate, and I hope he deeply appreciates the reference.
Who they used to call the hardest working man in show business, in James Brown. Jason Jackson, the hardest working man in sideline reporting and hosting and you name it. he is basketball's Mr. Go-To. That's for sure. It's really, really something. Anyway, got to wrap things up here, and we will see you again next time on Work in Progress. For Charles Epstein, I'm Tom Alexander. Take care, everybody. See you soon.
This has been Work in Progress, a World at Work podcast about work, life, and everything in between, with award-winning radio host Tom Alexander and Workspan's Not Safe for Work columnist Charles Epstein. For more, visit worldatwork.org/work-in-progress. That's worldatwork.org/work-in-progress. Join us next week for another edition of Work in Progress.